The Center for Procurement Excellence is a nonprofit member organization with a mission of educating, promoting, and advocating for better RFP processes. Join CPE today and make your RFPs faster and more transparent. Membership also includes discounts to all of our training and networking events. CPE hosts a variety of virtual and in-person networking and training events throughout the year. Visit our website to get signed up. CPE Speakers Bureau is available for your regional and national meetings and professional conferences. Contact us to learn more.
Welcome to Ask the RFP Doctor, CPE's monthly web series where we discuss the latest best practices in procurement and supply chain management.
Okay, so we're going to talk about the secret to high-performing, high-qualified suppliers and how they can actually lower cost. And many times the reason why we think about this is that, well, if we're going to hire somebody good, that's an expert, what we've heard a lot of times, folks assume that, well, they're also going to cost more money because you have to pay people that are really good. And while there are certainly truths to that somewhat, based on our experience, having run literally thousands of RFPs across many, many different types of projects, that is not the case. And so we're going to talk about today, really our fundamental question here is, do expert suppliers cost more? And if not, why not? So to kind of set the stage of where this is coming in at, let me go through a little bit of data. Now, some of you that have regularly attended Ask the RFP Doctor might remember our colleague Brian Lyons last year had presented some of this data before, but I felt like we didn't get the full picture. So I'm going to kind of set the stage a little bit with that, and then we're going to add more to what we actually talked about. So to understand this question, because again, we get asked it all the time, what does it cost? Does it cost more? We took 327 projects that we had procured with our consulting group called Simplar, and we looked at all this different data. For those 327 projects that we were involved with, we put together 1,500 individual proposals. So about 5 proposals per project. So we took all these proposals. They were focused on construction just to have a uniform set of data. But you could do this for IT or other types of projects we have available. We just chose construction. So AEC, architecture, engineering, construction. Better controls for the quality of scope of work, meaning they're a little bit more consistent, and against a very well-established sector, which is another reason why we did that. So we took these 1,500 proposals and we looked at them and we really evaluated them for a couple different things. One was a cost in terms of the percent fee, fixed fee, whatever it might be, GMP, different markups, right? We also used the exact dollars that were proposed on the project. So these are not estimates, these are not, ballparks, these are the actual dollars that the firms have proposed as part of this year. So that's the first thing. The other thing we looked at here was their technical proposal, their past performance information, which is things like surveys, customer surveys about the companies that are proposing. And then we also conducted interviews that are conducted as part of this year. These scores here were done by either the evaluation committee, so the people that are actually evaluating the proposals that are coming in, or by past customers through the surveys, the past performance information. These are subjective ratings on scales of 1 to 10 for different types of components here, right? So we have the raw dollars, the actual dollars, and then subjective evaluations from a committee, and we go through and evaluate that, all right? And as a reminder, here's what we found out as part of that. Do higher qualifications result in higher cost? So again, we looked at evaluation scores, past performance in the interviews, and looked at that compared to the cost proposals. Now, I want to be clear here is that I know myself, Brian, we have some students, PhD students that work with us. And Jeff too, sure. We like data, we like analysis, and we like statistics. And you can tell any story you want for sure with statistics here, but we like looking at the data to see what's actually going to happen. We ran numerous different types of correlations. In fact, we did a total of 26, and we looked at every single possible combination that we could look at. And we're looking at correlations between, does quality result in more cost? We looked at the technical proposals, the surveys, the interviews, different combinations, just contractors, just design professionals. No matter what we looked at, we found zero correlation between the qualifications and the cost of those firms here. Okay. Now, what about the extremes here? Maybe it's just, full data set. What if we look at the extremes of this as well to see if a different outcome? We sorted all 1,500 proposals from highest to lowest in terms of the overall score. So a number one basically had a perfect score of all the points that were available. 1,500 was a watch out type thing here. And what we found here, we put all these together and we started grouping them. Maybe the most qualified again would have more, higher cost, right? So we took those 1,500 proposals, we grouped them together. Again, where the top are on the best, 89 to 100% of the scores. Think of your top line folks above average, 66 to 88% of the total points, and so forth here, and organize these from top to bottom, right? And surely, looking at cost here, you organize the costs, we'd expect that, again, the folks that are on top, more cost. Is that what we saw? Well, folks, as you can guess here, we looked at this here, zero differences across those groups. None, right? So that's what makes this so interesting in terms of what actually transpired when going through all this data here, right? So that's what we talked about before here, but really the main question we have for ourselves is, okay, great, but Jake, you haven't answered why this has taken place. Why don't they cost more in spite of all these different things? And to help us understand that here, I'm going to do a really old school reference. Maybe some of you know this is, but who is this? Anybody know? Paul Harvey. Paul Harvey. And his common saying was what?
And now, the rest of the story.
The rest of the story here. All right. So let's talk about why this is actually the case. Why don't higher quality firms actually cost more here, right? The way we're going to do this here is we're going to go through a project. Again, we have lots of examples of this, but this particular project was really interesting where we've seen this happen time and time again here. And we're going to walk through what actually took place, right? Now, the one thing that we go through this here is that context is really important. And what I mean by that is you have to put yourselves in the shoes of the contractors and thinking about what their perspective might be in all this here. Now, at the time for this particular city, they had procured and provided project oversight on 9 different projects. We had been involved with them for about a year and a half or so. 9 different projects we had helped them procure and manage, provide oversight on, about $47 million of total value. These projects at the time before our new project were about 92% complete. In other words, we had all the data, the projects had gone well, we had all this information, so we had a really good feel for what this were here. Now, folks, I'd be glad to share the raw data with you, but here's a summary of how those projects had gone. The change order rate on those 9 projects so far, 0.6%. The contractor change order rate was negative 0.1%. So how can you have a negative change order? What we found on some of the projects is that as the projects wrapped up and got closer to the end, the contractors identified that they had extra funding available and they returned that to the owner. They didn't use everything that was available because they got done what had to get done, and so they actually had a negative change order rate, right? Schedule delays. The overall schedule delays was 45%. Now let me caution that a little bit. 38% of those schedule delays were due to owner changes. So they had additional scope. They had some other things they wanted changed out. There's some unforeseen conditions as well. About 7% of that 45 was due to unforeseen conditions. But the contractor generated change order rates, 0.0%. There's no reasons due to delays because of the contractors, right? Now, why does this matter here? And why am I talking about how well projects had gone so far, right? The city, in our work with them over time, had worked with them to fundamentally change their procurement process, meaning that we want to hire vendors that really know what they're doing, expert vendors, and because of that, we have to be fair in terms of how we engage with them. That if there's unforeseen conditions or scope changes, we pay for that as the owner. The contractors use their expertise. There's an entire cultural shift that had happened over a period of time as to why we talked about that. That's important here as we come up. So a couple of pictures of the jobs. These are various types of projects, transit centers, office buildings, and so forth. Things have really gone here. Things have gone really well up to this point in time, right? So finally, we get to the main event. The big project is finally here. The budget of this new project was about $67 million, right? So $67 million, 188,000 square feet. This project here is kind of what we might call a cornerstone project, meaning that it had been talked about in the city for probably 15 years, right? So it's a lot of eyeballs on it, a huge space. And the reason why they were driving to do this project here is that the city had estimated because of the lack of space at their convention center, they had lost out on numerous conventions, minimum $75 million of revenue at the time, probably way more than that today. But they had lost out on a lot because they frankly couldn't host the number of people that they were going to do this, right? So context matters. It's a really big project, a lot of political pressure to do really well on this job. And so the city had reached out to us for, again, continuing to help to how to deliver this here. So here's what we found. We had four firms, four general contractors that had submitted proposals. Two of the four were over that $67 million budget. So they weren't really in contention because, I mean, their costs were outside of the budget, but that's what we had available. We did interview all four firms because, I mean, if there's something happened with the two that are less than the budget, then we could still have that option available. But we, excuse me, we did interview all four firms. And from each firm, we conducted 5 individual interviews with each proposer. So the project manager, superintendent, the HVAC person, their main person, plumbing, and finally electrical. Okay, now here's where things get super interesting, right? And as I go through this here, imagine for a moment that you are the procurement specialist on this RFP. Like, close your eyes, imagine that you're actually involved in this project here. And what does that actually mean, right? So you have you have political pressure to do a really good job on this. Who you pick is really important. Everybody's jockeying to be have this on their resume. Um, the budget it's a big project, relative to everything else here. This is basically twice the amount of normal size of types of projects you do here. There is a tremendous amount of pressure on the procurement team to do this well and have it done efficiently. Okay, so with that in mind here, here's the results of the procurement. So what this shows here is we have our different criteria that were provided. So we had the cost, we had a plan called a risk assessment, value assessment, interviews. These are the weights that are provided, so the criteria on these different items here. And you had really two firms that were competitive. Firm A is at $65.6 million, and firm B is at $60.4 million. Okay? They're both below the budget. You have the risk assessment scores. And then over here, what we have here is their total score. So firm A, who's at $65.5 million, has a score of 96%. Firm D, who has a cost of $60.3 million, is at 95%. So a slightly lower score, and the cost is also a lot lower, right? These are the results, and you as procurement have to provide a recommendation as to the next steps, okay? So there's a couple of things that we think about here, right? So what do we do, right? So I want you to ask yourself, we're not going to, collect feedback at this point in time here, but imagine that this is your project. These are the outcomes here. What do we do in this situation? Or in other words, which firm A or firm D, do we invite forward to the next step, right? What do we tell the proposers, the contractors that provide the proposal on this? And more importantly here is what additional information do we actually need, right? Now, remember, as part of this here, is that the highest ranked firm, which was firm A, was only 1% better overall. The highest ranked vendor was $5 million higher, or 8% higher than the second ranked firm, right? So there's a pretty substantial cost differential, right? So the difference in performance in terms of overall scores was only 3%. Both firms had really high performance evaluation scores. So take a step back here and ask yourselves, what do you do, right? Do you talk to both of them? Do you go with the highest score? Do you pick the cheapest? Do you do something else here? If you talk to both of them, which is the most common response that folks kind of say to this here, is like, well, what would you ask them that might help you make this decision, right? And our concern here is that if you talk to both of them, then are you actually going to understand better what might happen here if you actually do that, and then you have to somehow compare the responses, and maybe you don't get a good answer, right? So it's a very difficult situation as to what we're going to do here. Now, part of our work when we work with different organizations, we have different specific things that based on our experience and working different types of projects, there's certain language that we provide as part of the RFP that can make this that protects the owner as part of what this experience is, right? One of the rules that we had inside the RFP that we developed with the owner is that if the highest ranked proposer is within the budget, but is more than 5% of the second highest ranked proposer, the city reserves the right to invite that second ranked firm to the clarification phase, to this partnering phase that we call that, right? So there was a rule available to actually help us do this, understand what's going on, right? So when we went through this here and we talked about what actually should take place as part of this discussion, and again going back to our summary here in terms of what needs to happen, our recommendation at the time, and this is what we eventually did, is that well we should ask the contractors, especially firm D, why their cost is so much lower. Right? That's the main thing we're focused on, right? I mean, look at this. Firm D, $60 million. Firm A is $65 million. That's a $5 million differential. The main question fundamentally we should all be asking here is why are they $5 million lower? Now, at the time with the city, when we recommended that they ask Firm D directly, why is your cost $5 million lower? The response was from this other consultant who was a CM rep. The response was, you can't ask the contractors that. There's no way in the world they can answer that. They have no idea what their competitors bid. You're asking them a question that they can't answer in the first place. And folks, I got to be honest, I completely disagree. My suspicion, and based on different types of projects and things we've seen in talking with folks here, is that the contractors know exactly, or very close to exactly, what their competitors bid. As a matter of fact, I suspect that Firm D knew they were $5 million less before they even submitted their proposals. Absolutely, especially the firms that know what's going on here, right? So that was our recommendation. We sent a letter to the contractor on behalf of the city. We're pleased to talk to you next steps. But before we do that, we have three major questions. Please read your cost estimate. That is accurate. Focus on your general labor costs. I explain why they might be 20% lower for those specific items. But most importantly here is why should the city feel comfortable that your cost proposal is accurate, knowing there's just a large discrepancy in their cost, right? Because it's totally possible that their cost is lower because they missed something, right? And then you'll have lots of change orders, and that'll be difficult, and you'll end up where you started in the first place. That's a very legitimate response. That's the letter that we helped the city write. They sent that to the contractor. The contractor responded to that, and the main essence of what they said here was the following, right? The last two projects we won were about 5% below the average. Okay, they've done this before. They used preferred subcontractors, which saved some money, $700,000. They did self-performing on the demolition, concrete, and other activities. Personnel from the local area. We did not include a tower crane. We did contract with one mechanical, one electrical. There's some market discussions about timing and so forth, right? Did not assume a full-time staff here, but here is the main one. So what they're doing here is you take that $5 million differential and they're adding up line by line here, in their opinion, as to what could explain what that happened here. Here's the very last component they said. And this, when we saw this here, we were blown away as a research team. Last thing the contractor said is that because of the city's advanced procurement process and their clear alignment of roles and expectations, we as a contractor did not include contractor contingency. That's a huge deal, folks, right? I'm not going to stand on my desk and shout how big of a deal this is, but this is massive. Why is it such a big deal? Well, normally what happens is that if you are a contractor and you're working with an owner who is known to be difficult or asks you to do things that are not really part of your scope, what you do as a contractor is you take money and you set that aside to deal with what you call craziness. Being asked to do things that are not a normal part of how you might do business, right? So you set aside all this extra money to deal with contingencies. Now, I'm not talking about unforeseen conditions, right? I'm not talking about, you had a sub that had some different issues. I'm talking about a pot of money that many contractors set aside to deal with difficult owners. At this point in time, the city, for about 2 or 3 years, had taken an intentional effort to tell the industry that if you encounter unforeseen conditions, if we have scope changes, we as the owner will pay for all that. You don't need to include that because we will take care of it. That's not a normal mode of thinking. It's a much more proactive approach on the owner as to how they're going to deal with that project. The contractors, and this is why this is such a big deal, the contractors were convinced the owner actually meant that. In other words, the contractor says, because you as an owner are willing to be reasonable, to work with us on these things, to actually be fair, we will save you a lot of money, right? Now, some other interesting results, we've not really seen this before, but we suspect it happens more often than not, but we have the data available. 3 of the 4 general contractors use the same HVAC and plumbing subcontractor firms, right? So there's 4 firms total, 3 of them use the same subs for those different areas. The subcontractors, though, they assign different teams to different general contractors. They didn't have to. We didn't tell them you had to use different teams. They, on their own, picked which people are going to work with different GCs here. Now, the question here is, why would that be? Our suspicion, which we never actually verified this here, but our strong suspicion is that the subcontractors, have an intuition as to which GC is going to be more competitive. Or in other words, who they're working with on the GC side is directly tied to what teams we're going to assign to the project. Although they have the same GCs here, the costs were different. Now that's a little bit understandable in terms of scoping and so forth, right? The risk assessment scores, those evaluation scores, those were different. Value assessment plans are all different, and the interviews were also different as well in terms of the overall scores here, right? So in summary, when we think about this, and what we're actually seeing here to answer the rest of the story is that a vendor or contractor's cost is much more related to their perception, real or not, of how easy it is to work with the owner. When I talk about easy, what that means here is pays on time. The owner has reasonable terms. The vendors can actually use their expertise. That's what that means here. And these are the primary things that as a contractor, as they're evaluating who do I want to work with here, these are some of the key things that they're actually thinking about here. So how is it that high quality firms are able to save money? Because we as an owner are a client of choice. Because we're easy to work with. We also save my money by hiring experts. And also, and I know this last one here is totally counterintuitive, is that we save money by stopping using low bid. That's how we do it, right? So if we want to be seen as that organization that gets the best contractors at the lowest cost possible, these are what we have to do. Now, folks, I know I'm talking about a single project with an organization. We have run this across thousands of procurements, and we see the same pattern happening over and over and over again. That when we start working and discussing with expert contractors, it is not the same mode of operation. The people we work with are not low bidders. They have a fundamentally different approach in terms of how they think about the project here.
This has been Ask the RFP Doctor, brought to you by the Center for Procurement Excellence.